Welcome to Locked On Heat. On today's show, I'm joined by Sports Illustrated's Howard Beck for a big picture look at the Miami Heat and some of the end of season award races that some Heat personnel could be involved in. Plus, Howard tells me when he became a believer in the Heat's chances to come out of the East. All of that's coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, here now with Howard Beck from Sports Illustrated. Big thanks to Howard for joining the show here. And we're going to talk about some Miami Heat stuff because, well, that's what we do here. And we thought we could get a national voice on to discuss the Heat because it just sounds like not a lot of people have been doing that on the national platforms. But before we get to that, Howard, you were at the Philadelphia Nets game, the Philadelphia 76ers Brooklyn Nets game the other night. And these are the two teams that are being talked about, maybe more than any other teams in the league, certainly more than any other teams in the Eastern Conference. What were your impressions of that matchup and then your impressions overall with Brooklyn's win and Philadelphia since the Harden deal?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Wes, for having me on. The Sixers Nets thing, it's funny because, this league is so much about spectacle sometimes. And so, yes, they are drawing a lot of oxygen, using a lot of oxygen in the NBA discussions, and especially about the East in general, and in a really weird way, in a sense, because here's the Sixers with, a pretty stout record, and by standings, clearly a contender. And besides that, the first 5 games of Harden and Embiid looked spectacular. And then you've got the Nets, who by record and by standing seem to be on the fringes of even being a postseason team right now. But my gosh, when Durant and Kyrie are out there together, and who knows what it'll look like when Ben Simmons eventually joins them, they look like they can slay dragons. So it was interesting to watch that game in person and to see the different personalities of this team come out. Now, we also in the NBA media and fandom are prone to a lot of overreaction theater. It was just one game. It's not a referendum on the trade. It's not a statement game. It's not anything. And if they meet in the playoffs, everything could be very, very different. But what I saw in that game was a Nets team that was hyper-focused, aggressive as hell, knew exactly what it wanted to do and did it. And a Sixers team that just did not seem to have that same like an established identity. And like you'd wave that off and say, well, fine. Of course they don't. Harden has only been there for a few weeks. He's only played, that was his 6th game with them. But we can't swing that wildly back and forth from they look like world beaters in the first 5 games with Harden, right, and then say, well, it's early yet after that. And both things are fair, but I just, it was funny to watch like Twitter in real time while being at the game, and to see everybody basically making the same jokes and just one-liners and slights, because it's the obvious thing, which is, oh, here we go, playoff Harden, there it is. And listen, he's earned that. Okay. Like you can't run from your own resume. That's there. You want to dispel that, James Harden? Great. Show us in the postseason with this team, with Joel Embiid, and we'll see. But if you're if you're gonna go 3 for 17 in a big game, in what feels, like, no regular season games are really big, let's be honest, but right, in what feels like a playoff atmosphere and all the hype and all the energy and all the intensity that went into it because of Ben Simmons coming back, even though he didn't play and all that, like you then have to live with that. You have to say, like, this is the context of the game. If you come up short, you know what's coming. Yeah. So that, whether that's all fair or not is almost besides the point. James Harden still has a burden to bear in that regard. And again, to the contrast of these two teams, there are days where I'm not sure we should even be considering the Nets as a contender in the East because.
Well, before you move off the Harden thing, because that's a really after they made that trade, Me and a lot of other people were like, all right, the 76ers, I don't even care about the chemistry stuff. At the end of the day, it's James Harden, it's Joel Embiid. And sometimes I do think we overthink fit and chemistry and stuff.
We
Sometimes
do.
just talent does just, if you have maybe one of the best 5 scorers in the NBA and an MVP candidate and maybe the MVP favorite in Joel Embiid, I think it's just sometimes it just works out.
Yeah.
And in that instance, I was like, all right, Sixers are the favorite in the East. I don't care anymore. Like that, they are. They're the team to beat now at the very least. I don't know. Maybe I'm one of these guys overreacting to that Sixers game, but like, for example, if I'm a James Harden fan, right, and I want so desperately for James Harden to win a championship, but I know the demons that have kind of tracked James Harden in his career, that he doesn't show up for playoff games, and all of that's true. It's not narrative stuff. It's all true. He doesn't show up for big playoff games. If I'm a big James Harden fan rooting for James Harden to get over the hump, I'm a little bit more worried about my guy after watching that Brooklyn Nets game, right? And I don't know if that means anything. I'm just saying it was a big moment, and he did fall short. And I know, like, to your point, they looked awesome the first 5 games. This is their first loss with Embiid and Harden. This is the first time that they were held to fewer than 120 points in those games, even. And so they've been dominant for I don't know math, 90% of the time with Harden, but that is a little concerning, and that's maybe not enough for me to move off of Philadelphia as favorites. There's some other factors that we'll talk about, but it's something to remember, I guess, is the
Yeah.
best way to put it.
Yeah. But by the way, to the point of Harden's, I think, irrefutable postseason record in his history. Zach Lowe did I thought the definitive analysis of that maybe a year or two ago, and you really can't get around it. And every game that a Harden defender might point to as counter argument, Zach noted, like, all right, yeah, when he came up big, it was often, the series was already lost or the game was already whatever. Like his bigger numbers were generally not in high stakes situations. He might have a couple of them, but his bad games are almost always been in high stakes situations. Right. So it is what it is. I was one who said, and I still believe this was the rare deal, especially for a blockbuster deal of this type. Like you rarely see all-stars, still current all-stars, traded for each other, and especially mid-season between 2 potential contenders. And I thought both teams won. Like they absolutely both did when you consider the context of it all. And the Nets made out great because Simmons is 7 years younger, and I think probably a better fit overall. We'll see. Harden is playing, whereas Ben Simmons is not, so that the Sixers certainly won in that regard. And besides that, like, I think it helps to have a primary ball handler who actually is a threat to shoot and to score, to keep defenses honest. And Ben Simmons couldn't do that for the Sixers, and it won't be the same in Brooklyn, given they have 2 elite scorers. But yeah, these things evolve, and all the concerns about fit and how does it affect Tyrese Maxey. For 5 games, it looked like all those arguments were completely irrelevant. And then last night they seemed very irrelevant. And that's how this goes. That's basketball. Like
it's all small samples right now. We have no idea really what this is going to be.
No. And they've got a very little time to get to create enough of a sample size to make it reliable.
Mm-hmm. Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar is truly a standout among protein bars with its exceptional nutritional profile and so many delicious flavors. Built Bar is the favorite protein bar of many discerning fitness trainers and fitness enthusiasts alike. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, taste better than your current protein bar, and are a perfect fit for an after-workout snack or some needed energy in the middle of a busy day. Built Bars are low in calories and carbs. They're high in fiber. They are packed with protein. Check out these macros. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. You compare that to most protein bars, and Built Bars are a clear winner. Plus, Built Bars come in great flavors such as mint brownie, raspberry, salted caramel, cookies and cream, and much more. And new for this month is a St. Patrick's Day themed shamrock flavor. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. And have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting products. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy and covered in 100% real chocolate and come in churro, coconut marshmallow, and banana cream pie flavors. So here's the offer. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off on your order. Again, use that promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com.
Well, I want to talk to you about the Miami Heat because they're the team that nobody's talking about. And now we've gotten to the point, I think, in the media landscape where we're talking about how nobody's talking about them. almost exclusively that's the conversation around the Miami Heat. Hey,
it's like the Jokic MVP thing.
Exactly. The Miami Heat.
Why
are
isn't
the
anybody
Nikola Jokic
talking about it? Well, if everybody is talking about nobody's talking about it, then everybody's talking about it.
Everybody's talking about it. But that's all they're talking about is that nobody's talking about it. So nobody's really talking about the team that's been the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference for quite a while now. That was in the NBA Finals with this core, with this coach just a couple years ago. As I don't know, favorites in the East, and I'm not here to lobby that they ought to be. I guess I'm just going to ask, and I don't want to ask you to speak on behalf of all of media, though if you want to, you certainly can. But why do you think people are having such a hard time getting to that point beyond the nobody's talking about the team type of conversation?
Yeah, I will never profess to be speaking on behalf of all media. It's actually also funny, even because like you said it, and I'm not giving you grief for this, but like hey, come on, bring on the national perspective, and because I hear that a lot doing radio around the country, and I always think like, wait a minute, since when am I like speaking on behalf of like Zach Lowe and Sam Amick and everybody? Like I can't,
That's the deal. You work for Sports Illustrated. That's just comes to the territory.
It's way too much responsibility. I cannot possibly handle that. Speaking on behalf of only myself, it's funny. So I do think that covering this league, and I think fans do this, media does this, we all do this. We have these certain tendencies that they're conditioned into us, right? Yeah. How do you spot a contender in the NBA if you weren't even looking at the standings, if the games hadn't even been played yet, as we do every October when we're all making ridiculous prognostications about the season? It pretty much boils down to talent, right? Like the more top 5, top 10, top 15 guys you got, the more we expect from you. And so the Heat are what's the phrase? Built different. They're built different, right?
Right.
Do we need the snorting emoji behind that?
We do. We need a snorting. We need a hashtag culture thing. I think we need to hang a flag in your background here.
Your listeners don't need to hear me actually snorting into the microphone. Like that's not good podcasting.
Yeah.
They're built different, and by that I mean not just that they're tough snort emoji. I mean Jimmy Butler is not your prototypical franchise star to carry a contender because he's not a massive numbers guy. Can score with the best of them when he needs to, doesn't make it his calling card. Jimmy just does everything. He does a lot of everything, and he does it in the proportions that are necessary for that moment in that game, and that's what I love about him as somebody who watches the game. Kyle Lowry is a multiple-time All-Star who's near the end of his career, and Bam Adebayo is a young guy who's making All-Star teams, or should be making All-Star teams if he can stay healthy. But he's not putting up 30 and 15 every night. So like you look at the roster and like there's a lot of guys that everybody loves, that every team in the NBA would love. In fact, I was just having this discussion with Evan Cohen on NBA radio the other day about his premise was that the Heat basically roll 15 deep. And I said, it may only be more like 13, but still, like if you've got 13 guys that almost on any team you'd consider a rotation player, that's pretty good for depth purposes. But they don't have KD and Kyrie. They don't have Embiid and Harden. They don't have Giannis or even Giannis Middleton Drew, but especially Giannis. And so at a glance, and it's simplistic and reductive and everything else, but it also kind of generally proves to be true over time, right? If you got the superstars, or especially a guy who's like, top 5 caliber and MVP caliber guy, you're ahead of everybody else. And so I think that's the disconnect with the Heat. Apologies for the sirens in the background. This is just giving you genuine Brooklyn soundtrack here.
I love it. We're in Miami. I'm on Miami on this end, so I might get sirens here too any minute now.
All right. Paramedic FDNY, not a cop. So at least it's not, somebody being shot at or anything. So I think it's just that, right? People can look at the Heat, respect the Heat, understand what they're about and how tough they are. And, even on the offensive side, like I love how they share the ball on that team, and they've got great 3-point shooting. And there's a lot of requisite stuff there that you would say qualifies them as a contender. And that's why they are where they are in the standings. But it's kind of like, I don't want to compare them to the Jazz because I higher expectations for the Heat than the Jazz, and the Jazz have a track record of not living up to their regular season records when the playoffs come. But it's kind of like that, where again, you glance at the Jazz and you say, well, all right, well, Donovan Mitchell's a really nice player and a top something. And Rudy Gobert is an incredible defender, and one guy anchors one end, one guy anchors the other. But I just don't see the firepower. I don't see the star power. That's kind of the Heat in a different way. And I think that's the reason for the disconnect. All of that said, Wes, and I really want to make this point clear because this is not pandering. I've been saying this for weeks or maybe months. I have felt all along the Heat are absolutely a legit contender to win the East. They may not have the star power. They may not have the firepower offensively in terms of a bunch of guys who can create at a really high level. And Jimmy is great, but Jimmy is not Giannis and Jimmy is not Kevin Durant. I think the sum of their parts is really impressive and really dangerous and is going to just like wear teams down besides. So do I think they can beat the Heat? I know there's recent history of not, but do I think they can take the Heat can beat the Bucks 4 out of 7? Yeah, I think they can. And whoever else you want to put up there, I think their defensive toughness and discipline and the way they share the ball offensively that can create, like you need to create shots in tough situations in the playoffs. And so that's always an issue. Like, can Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler, Herro, can they do enough in tight situations? I don't know. We'll see. But I have them firmly in the hunt. And that hunt is now getting crowded because like Boston revived itself and Jason Tatum is playing at an MVP type level. And there's just a lot of contenders, atop the East right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be an interesting case study for the Miami Heat, this playoff run, because number one, we haven't really seen, I guess, outside of the 2014 Spurs, a team like this, absent of anybody that's outside of the top 5 on an MVP ballot, win the championship, right? And again, the 2014 Spurs, I think during the player empowerment era, the super team era, whatever we want to call it, they're the only team. And that's getting further and further away. And there are more and more quote unquote super teams sort of being assembled. So I don't know. And you mentioned the sum of their parts. Well, the other thing too is if the Heat get ousted by one dominant performance from Giannis or KD or Jason Tatum, whoever it might be, they might have some ammo here in the summer to maybe make a move. Like, you know what? Star player wasn't why we didn't get to our goal to get to the finals. Let's go get star player, or at least try to, right? And we always know Pat Riley wants to swing big that way. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the playoffs for them. You mentioned some of these other teams there. Is there in your mind maybe a best or worst matchup, a matchup that you would be super intrigued by? I'm sort of giving you all the options to take this wherever you want to go. But as far as a playoff matchup, because first of all, nobody wants to see the Brooklyn Nets in the first round. We've heard that enough times on every single broadcast available during a Brooklyn game. But, obviously the Nets would not be a great draw as an 8 seed. But anything other than that, that's an intriguing matchup to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think and we'll see with the Nets. Like, I remain a little bit skeptical, and I know that sounds crazy in the wake of them destroying the Sixers, but Kyrie still isn't eligible for home games, so there's that.
Yep.
and Ben Simmons still hasn't played for them, and they won't have very much time to incorporate him. And the number of games that if the law doesn't change in New York, the number of games that Ben Simmons and Kyrie can play together before the playoffs, I think is a maximum of like 3 or something, 5.
Yeah.
It's some very, very low number. That's not exactly the formula typically in the NBA for cohesion and chemistry.
And for everybody saying that Ben Simmons could be their Draymond Green is Draymond Green because of chemistry, years and years of chemistry built up with Steph. Draymond Green is also Draymond Green, and this is not something that gets talked about a lot, is because he yells at everybody on the court, and that doesn't really strike me as Ben Simmons' deal. Like, that's not necessarily his MO. So
agreed.
Yeah,
it's a fine comparison functionally,
right?
But it is not a good comparison otherwise, and it's kind of an insult to Draymond Green because Draymond is so smart about the game and so vocal and so insistent and demanding of your attention and your respect. And like, also he and Steph have like some kind of like telepathic communication.
They do.
And Ben Simmons doesn't even have like actual verbal communication with a lot of people, it seems like, much less telepathic. He should work on maybe the actual verbal communication first.
Maybe it's only telepathic, and that's why he doesn't speak out loud.
There you go. We've not given him enough credit for it. That's why he doesn't say much, because he's actually just communicating directly, brain to brain. Yeah, I mean, listen, it does take years and a lot of experience and a lot of time together on the court. That's what chemistry is, right? It's not that they love each other. Like, they're great chemistry teams. It's not because everybody loves hanging out. Sometimes it's that too, but primarily it's about how to read each other and intuit what you're doing and where to go and when and where guys like the ball, timing, all these little subtleties that, they do take time. And so I don't buy that you can just throw Ben Simmons in there with a handful of games left and say, all right, you're now a full-time starter with huge responsibilities at both ends. And, you guys go figure out how to make a run to the title after never playing together before. I mean, I think that's a stretch. The firepower is what it is. And so you can never count them out. But
that is what I think is pretty interesting about the Heat too, is that you add Kyle Lowry pretty recently. There is a relationship friend to friend with him and Jimmy Butler, but to your point, like, that's not a basketball relationship. The thing about the Warriors is they're not really, like, they're friendly, but they don't, like, Draymond, Clay, and Steph don't hang out. Like, they have great chemistry on the court. And so the Heat, they have somehow figured out this chemistry. I know Bam and Jimmy have been playing together for a lot of years, but Kyle Lowry's the point guard and he has a lot of responsibilities. But there does seem to be a chemistry there that's sort of developed. And maybe that's just something that happens when your three best players are just super high basketball IQ, high level playmaking guys. Maybe that is what we think chemistry is, and it just turns out that they're just awesome at passing the basketball. I don't know, but that does seem to be one of the Heat's strengths right now is chemistry. Now, it's probably them and Milwaukee as far as, like, the chemistry leaders in the Eastern Conference, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. If we're doing chemistry rankings among the top teams, yeah, Milwaukee and Miami would be the two I would put at the top. And that's, look, a lot of that is just the, guys being together for a while. So you've got the cohesion built up over time. The Bucks having already done it at the highest level. But yeah, there's just a lot of familiarity and trust there now. And, that stuff matters. And I think Miami does have that too. And certainly they both those teams have it way ahead of Philly and the Nets because of that shakeup trade in the middle of the season. And there's really, like, has anybody ever, I mean, I guess Boston's kind of in the conversation, and their core has been together for a while. That core has not always functioned all that well in terms of chemistry, basketball wise, but they seem to have figured it out now. And maybe all the bumps they've gone through over the last few years are now an asset because they have gotten through that and built off of it and improved. So, Boston might push its way into that chemistry conversation as well.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. It's that time of year again as college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. From all of the latest odds, contests, and player props, betonline.net is the #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts.
Let's talk about some awards at the end of the season. The Heat have 3 personnel, I guess would be the way to phrase it, that are up for these awards according to the latest odds via Bet Online. Coach of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year. Sixth Man of the Year, kind of feel like it's Tyler Herro's to lose. Like, he could probably go 0 for 15 for the final 15 games of the season and probably still win it at this point, given that he's like a minus 2,000 favorite right now to win it. You could feel free to disagree. If not, we'll just move on to the next one.
No, sorry. I was trying to pull up standings as you were talking, so I could do a quick reference on when we get to coach. No, Tyler Herro, I feel like has been the odds-on leader. And I mean odds-on figuratively, not literally, because I don't actually pay attention to odds. But that he's been there since early in the season when it first was clear that Tyler Herro had not only rediscovered the Tyler Herro from his rookie year, but it had actually improved on it. And he hasn't slowed down pretty much. I haven't thought about Sixth Man of the Year recently in terms of like who else is even in that discussion. Like, we'll get ballots in another 3 weeks, and at that time I'll bear down and make sure I've considered everybody. But if you were asking me off the top of my head right now, Tyler Herro is like the only guy in the conversation.
Right.
And there will
Kelly
be
Oubre right now. Kelly Oubre for Charlotte is got the second best odds, and they're miles from Herro's odds. That's that to your point. That's sort of where we're at. Like Kelly Oubre is like, all right,
Kelly
like,
Oubre is the second in the
yep,
odds.
yep.
Holy moly!
I looked at, and the only reason I'm with you, like, I'm not looking at this stuff right now. I just looked it up this morning for the sake of this podcast, and I was like, what? Like, he's been fine. Like, he's a nice player.
No, I think Tyler's got a very, very, very good
Yeah.
chance of winning it, and I say that knowing full well we are in early March, mid-March as we record this. Things are subject to change, so people don't hold me to it if I suddenly veer.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to make any picks. I don't think that's my place to do that. And like you said, you don't get ballots for 3 weeks, and it's not the time to make these picks. But I just thought it was interesting to talk about the race, and we could talk about Coach of the Year because I think that field is loaded. I can make the case for probably 7 or 8 coaches to win this thing this year. There's been a lot of good jobs. Obviously, Eric Spoelstra, we got to talk about him. He's 4th in odds. He's a plus 750 according to Bet Online. Monty Williams right now is the runaway favorite for Phoenix. He's a minus 300. And then there's JB Bickerstaff from Cleveland, and then Taylor Jenkins, of course, from Memphis. Again, there's a bunch of guys like Billy Donovan, I think, is 5th off the top of my head. There's a bunch of guys that have a claim or at least a really good argument to make for Coach of the Year. The Monty Williams thing is interesting. I said on yesterday's Locked On NBA, I think it's like 80% him super deserving it because Phoenix has been the best team in the league all season long. 20% a little bit of a makeup call for last year. Him not, but if he wins it, he totally deserves it. But Eric Spoelstra's got a good case too, considering the path that the Heat have taken this year.
Spo has become one of these guys who we take for granted, where every single year probably you could make a case for him to at least be on the ballot, if not at the top, and yet he never win. Has he ever actually won it? I don't.
He's never won it.
He's never won it.
Oh.
Phil Jackson had never won it. I believe maybe still never did, or maybe he finally got one belatedly at some point. It's funny when you're a great coach who wins year in, year out. Like Pop has only won it, I think, once, right? And like Pop's one of the greatest coaches of all time. And you would think that suggests he should have won 10 Coach of the Year awards, but like it just doesn't work that way. You know, some of it is that we're always looking for right or wrong, the coach who surprised us, who seemed to do the most with the least, which is why Monty Williams should have won it last year. And it wasn't most with the least, but it was more about wildly exceeding expectations, right? Team that had not even made the playoffs in whatever it had been 7, 8 years, 10 years maybe, and turned into one of the top teams in the West. Now, again, it's before the finals because ballots are turned in before playoffs even start, so you can't even consider that part of it. But I thought Monty Williams should have won it last year. He was at the top of my ballot, my actual ballot. And I think he actually got more first place votes than Tom Thibodeau, but the point system going 1, 2, 3, and the decreasing point system, that scale, right. The math just worked in Tibbs' favor because he got more seconds or something. But I think Monty got more firsts. I'm not sure if the makeup call idea is going to win him the award this time or not. But if we just take this season on its own in a vacuum, you could argue that he earned it again. The only thing that goes against the candidacy in a conceptual sense is, well, it's not as big of a surprise this time, right? Like the big leap was last year.
Yeah.
This year, it just kind of feels like more of the same. But they've had to navigate injuries. They've had to deal with the Robert Sarver fiasco, whatever it is, whatever it becomes when that report finally comes out from the law firm. They've had DeAndre Ayton as not being extended, with the team seemingly going cheap on him. There's Chris Paul being out now for 2 months.
And they're just awesome.
Yeah, and they're just awesome. And they just
all of their players got better. Cam Johnson got better. Devin Booker got better. He got him to engage defensively. Devin Booker's playing solid defense now. Mikal Bridges has gotten better. Yeah. Every
single year, by the way, I feel like we have this discussion of like, wow, it's a great field of Coach of the Year candidates. It's basically always like 7 or 8. This year, I think it's almost even 10. And I'm gonna double check here. So that's why I pulled up the standings. All right. So Spoelstra is in the running for sure. I think Billy Donovan's in the running. Obviously, the Bulls are one of the surprise teams of the season. I think Ime Udoka is making a late run at least being in the conversation. Bickerstaff, you mentioned with Cleveland. And then, all right, so that's it for the East. Skipping over to the West, Monty Williams, who we mentioned, Taylor Jenkins in Memphis, who you mentioned. I've heard Steve Kerr mentioned, and I think that's actually legit. Like, again, we take the Warriors for granted, but look at all they've had to deal with between Draymond being out for a long time, Clay coming back in. Weissman's missed almost the entire season. Rookies who have really blossomed, and that's a credit to Kerr and his coaching staff, that these guys on a contending team, that Kuminga and Moody are actually making great strides and being incorporated. So that's 7 coaches. I think Jason Kidd,
Agreed.
case for him.
Yep.
I think Mike Malone is another guy who gets overlooked pretty much every year
Yep.
for what he's doing with the Nuggets. And especially, again, we're going to give Jokic a lot of credit, rightfully, for what they've been able to do without Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., but Malone deserves a lot of credit for that too. Chris Finch in Minnesota, probably not on my ballot, but we shouldn't overlook it. And then Tyronn Lue, who's getting no run whatsoever. But the Clippers are, as you and I record this, the Clippers are 2 games over 500 with no Paul George for almost the entire season, or most of the season, no Kawhi Leonard for the entire season. Nobody on that roster you would look at and think, like, this guy is going to win them games by himself. It's like the Reggie Jackson show a lot of nights.
Yeah.
Like that they are a playoff team at all, and significantly ahead of the other LA team with all its star power. Ty Lue is not getting nearly enough respect or credit. And I hate saying that, because one of my least favorite phrases in sports discourse is give fill in the blank more credit, or we're not getting. I hate that. I now hate myself for even going down that road. I think I've named either 10 or 11 coaches at this stage.
I think you're at 11. And to my point, they all and it's so weird. Coach of the year, and this will be the last point, we can move on. But it's like for Steve Kerr, for example, right? Like this year was so much, like his coaching job this year is so much also to do about the last 2 years. Taking a team that had completely transformed when Kevin Durant left and just reshaping it and finding new role guys to be the new Iguodala's, even though he's back, but he doesn't really play for them. Livingston, all this stuff, and just finding new guys to do those things that they need them to do around Steph and Draymond, and now Clay being back. And it's sort of like, it's sort of just everything kind of coalesces into one season. Does that count for coach of the year? Or does that count for if we made up an award for coach of the last 3 years? Like, I don't know. Like, it's just such a weird sort of way to think about it. And it's the same could be said for Spo too. I mean, they didn't just sign Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and these guys. They had them last year too. And now they've started to blossom in large part because of the work that the Heat have put into them over the last year or so. Defensive player of the year. Bam Adebayo has the 4th best odds at plus 850. Again, according to Bet Online. Rudy Gobert is the favorite, but by a smidge, just a smidge. And it kind of feels like it's just sort of like we don't know who else to give this smidge to. We're going to give it to the guy who always wins this thing, smidge. Giannis, Jaren Jackson Jr. That's the top 4. Jarrett Allen was in that mix too, but after he got hurt, the odds just dropped. I still think like he should have a legit claim to this thing. Do you have any thoughts on defensive player of the year at this point? It's a really, this is, to me, it might be the toughest one for voters right now.
I think it's always the toughest one, to be honest, because we still don't know how to measure defense well, individual defense. And so, there are some frameworks that you try to employ. I mean, look, there's the usual, like, pull people around the league, talk to scouts and coaches and GMs or whatever, and see what people who are in players and see what people who are actually involved in the game at a high level think. And that's helpful. But when it comes right down to it, I think, see, it's funny. Like, I think in my earlier years covering the NBA, I feel like it always just defaulted to whoever either led in blocks or steals, or maybe both, and was part of a great defensive team. And we didn't have defensive metrics, and we didn't have win shares or defensive win shares, and we didn't have any of this tracking data. There was very little statistically to go on whatsoever, which I think is part of the reason why no guard has won it in 1,000 years, because big men, it's easy. Well, that guy anchors a great defense and blocks a lot of shots.
Boom.
So that's the default. And today's defense is more complicated, I think, than it was in the 90s, early 2000s. I think it's just really hard to measure. I always struggle with this one, especially early on at a time like this, where I really haven't even dove into the numbers yet.
Right. And
I will eventually. But yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to narrow it down based on, because if you're a great defensive player, if we're going to call you defensive player of the year, all right, given we can lop off the bottom 15 teams in defensive efficiency right off the bat, right?
Right. Yeah, totally.
Maybe even everybody outside of the top 10. And then it becomes kind of digging into the details of, like, okay, if you are, if you are the best defensive player or the defensive anchor on a top 10 defensive team, how essential are you to, or how much credit do we give you for that team's defensive rating? It's tough. And I think that, to your point about, like, Jared Allen, and this applies to Bam too. Look, I'll say it outright. Like, I am a stickler on the games played thing. We debate this in media circles, and there's some very strong opinions in both directions. I'm one who believes that these are awards that are of the year. It's the whole year. If you were elite defensively for 41 games and you missed the other 41, I'm sorry. Like, even if you were head and shoulders above everybody else, like, it matters that you play. It matters that you're available. Where's the cutoff? That's a little bit more flexible. You got to kind of weigh it. It's a little bit of a sliding scale. But Bam's missed a lot of games. Jared Allen's now going to miss, a couple months of games.
Draymond's missing a bunch of games. That's why he's not even on this list right now. I think.
Who was that?
Draymond.
Yeah.
Draymond Green. I mean, that's probably also a reason why this one's tough, is because everybody just gave it to him after the first month of the season, and then he got hurt, and we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So needless to say, I have a lot of homework to do between now and ballot time.
It's tough. Honestly, I don't even know if I had a vote. I don't know who I would vote for, because you're right. It's just it's a hard thing to kind of look at. A lot of it is just sometimes it's highlights. Sometimes it's like, hey, this guy made an awesome block, and then he wins.
Well, then we should just give it to John Morant for the greatest block I've ever seen.
I'm okay with that. I'm very much okay with that. Just take Defensive Player of the Year and just make it Defensive Play of the Year, and then make that the award.
That would be way easier.
It would be way easier. Howard Beck, thank you so much for joining the show. I really do appreciate it. Everybody, you could check out his work, of course, at si.com. Sports Illustrated does tremendous work over there. Sports Illustrated in general, doing awesome work, especially lately. So make sure that you check that out and subscribe to that publication. Howard, thank you so much.
No, Wes, thanks for having me, man. I'm glad we were able to finally work this out. And my bad that we didn't get to this sooner, but thanks for having me.
All good.